We're focusing on the terrible tongue, the power that's in our mouth, the power to say things that we wish later we could just somehow reach back and pull back in. Will you join me as we open in a word of prayer? Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you. We thank you for your word that you never sidestep issues. You just bring them to us head on. We thank you for individuals like James, who calls us to account, reminds us of where we stand, and then just bluntly tells us, fix it. Stop making excuses for it. Your word is designed, Lord, to be profitable in all things. And when it comes to our mouths, we know it is extremely profitable. We wish to be speaking blessings to each other and not cursing. We ask you to open our hearts and mind this morning. Give us wisdom. Help us to find and apply the truth that we're about to hear. In Jesus' name, amen. In Daniel chapter 6, a well-known chapter in the Bible in which Daniel is dealing with facing lions inside of a den. But before we even speak on that part, remember that there were leaders, fellow peers among Daniel, because a new empire came about and conquered Babylon. And in that realm, many of Daniel's colleagues came and decided to speak evil against Daniel. Had Daniel ever done anything wrong to cause them to be jealous? No. Daniel had always been faithful. Daniel had always told the truth. Daniel had always made sure that he gave wise counsel to the king. And now, when Darius is the king, he sets up a new administration. And these men plot together and begin to speak evil. Well, it goes something like this. I never really liked Daniel. Did you? He always seems to be doing the same things, and it kind of gets on my nerves. He always prays 3 times a day at his home. He leaves work, opens the window, and prays to his God. Don't you find that peculiar? I mean, we all believe in God, but do you pray 3 times a day? Facing his old city? Besides, aren't we tired? Don't we need a new regime? Don't we need to have new leadership? Shouldn't somebody else have an opportunity to rise up and do what Daniel's doing? Why should he always be doing it? Besides, Daniel is in his 80s. He's old. It's time for him to move on and let younger men come into power. Perhaps there was other things that were spoken and said. Hurtful, mean. But amongst that entire group, they all reaffirmed, yeah, I agree. They received the information. They believed it. Imagine at your work. If people are talking about other people to you, be guaranteed that they're talking about you to other people. In James chapter 3, turn with me to chapter 3, please. Our first fill-in as we look at the first 2 verses, it's the priority of the tongue. James talks about the priority of the tongue when he says, my brethren. Again, he's using that phrase to include himself. He's talking to a group of believers. My brethren, those fellow believers in Jesus Christ. Remember, James is the half-brother of Jesus. He didn't come to Jesus and believe in Jesus while Jesus lived in his home. It was probably like a piece of sand that was in between his clothes and constantly rubbing on him. Can you imagine? When mom called for Jesus or to do something, Jesus would, yeah, sure, why not? James is one of the brothers going, oh, how can I ever live up to be as perfect as Jesus? I will never be perfect like him. He's the favorite one. But James recognizes that he is the Son of God and becomes a believer later on. So he says, my brethren, let not many of you become teachers. The King James says masters. That idea is teachers. Knowing that we shall receive a stricter judgment. James begins with a specific priority. A specific priority geared towards warning against everyone becoming teachers. Now, why would James say that? Why is James warning everybody, his fellow believers, hey, not all of us should be teachers? In his culture, his time period, it was common within the synagogue for everybody to participate. For men to stand up and share their 2 cents, if you don't mind that expression. In fact, remember, where does Paul go to share the gospel? He always starts with the synagogue because it was an open forum for him to share. It was an open platform for him to talk about Jesus from the Old Testament and explain all that had transpired within Jerusalem. Teachers were held to a higher position of responsibility. They also received some sort of dignity, like the rabbis. Remember how often they came to Jesus and said, Master, teacher, rabbi. A position where people respected that individual. Rabbi so-and-so says, how often is he quoted? Paul reminds the Corinthians with the same type of problem. He says, how is it then, brethren, when you come together, every one of you has a psalm, a teaching, a tongue, a revelation, an interpretation? How is it that when we come together, everybody has something? Probably because it's our nature. It's our nature to want to lecture instead of being taught. Lehman Strauss, back in the 50s, wrote, he says, our proper place in the assembly should be manifestly that of ready listeners and learning. I see a great need among the brethren to cultivate a teachable spirit. The pride of scriptural knowledge has made men arrogant and critical. Some Christians seldom receive a blessing in public worship and teaching service because they did not come to be taught, but rather to judge the content and composition of the speaker's message. To my own shame, I verify of what he's saying is true. You can reach a point where you've received so much knowledge that you're more interested in the how-to than the what is being said. And James's warning is that we should be receivers, teachable, willing to hear God's word. Why is there a warning? Specifically, he lists out because there's a stricter judgment. For the teacher handles eternal truth. Truth that doesn't change, but yet you're responsible for that. We are to ponder the words. We are to give thought. We are to give prayer to the words. Remember Ezekiel in chapter 3, verse 17 and 18. God tells Ezekiel, you say what I'm saying. Do not alter my message. I'm paraphrasing. If I bring a judgment upon them, you tell them exactly what's coming. Because if you don't, I'm laying it against you. You will be held accountable for that. Take it to heart. Believe what's being said to you. But James moves from the specific of warning us not to be, all of us to become teachers, to a general priority. And that general priority is seen in verses 2 through 12. He says, for we all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he's a perfect man, able to bridle his whole body. Interesting, James uses the word we there. He includes himself in this. It's not just for you, it's for all of us. We are included here. Remember in 1 John 1:8, he says, if we say that we have no sin, we deceive ourselves. James says, we all stumble in many things. That's a present tense there. The idea is that we are going to make mistakes. We are going to trip and fall. But not all the time. Every time you walk through that door, you don't everyone does not trip on that rug. But I am well assured that somebody has tripped on that rug coming in at one time or another. And having tripped, you are mindful, I am going to mentally pick up my foot so I do not trip again. And we do the same thing here. We want to make sure that we do not stumble. And it's interesting, James doesn't say specifically what we stumble in. He says there's a lot of things that we stumble in. We stumble because we're sinners. But this is a mark of spirituality for the believer. If anyone does not stumble in word, he is a mature or perfect man. He's able to bridle his whole body. He or she is able to bring under control his actions, his deeds. In regards to the tongue, this is not the first time in chapter 3 that James brings this warning to the believers. I want you to look back in chapter 1, verse 19. We're going to go through this. I want you to see this for yourselves. In verse 19, he tells us, "So then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear and slow to speak." In verse 26, he says, "If anyone among you thinks he's religious but does not bridle his tongue, he deceives his own heart." There he's reminding us again, bridle your tongue. In chapter 2, verse 12, "And so speak as those who will be judged by the law of liberty." Speak as one who is going to be judged, be held accountable for what he says. In chapter 4, we're going to skip over chapter 3 since we're in that, but go to chapter 4, verse 11. "Do not speak evil of one another, brethren." Finally, chapter 5. Oh, I've lost this. Verse 12. "And above all, brethren, do not swear." No other teacher in the New Testament, except Jesus himself, uses pictures to explain his subject more than James. James is a master at doing this. And throughout his book, he is warning us about controlling our mouth, controlling our lips. Because since there's a priority of the tongue that's specifically geared for teachers and then generally for all of us, he also sees the potential of the tongue. In verses 3 through 4, he sees that potential for construction. He says, "Indeed, we put bits in horses' mouths that they may obey us, and that we might turn their whole body. Look, behold, also at ships. Although they are large, they are driven by fierce winds. They are turned by a very small rudder, wherever the pilot desires." The tongue has the power for constructive criticism. It is with the tongue that you and I might encourage an individual to go into the ministry, to do something they've never done, to serve someone. I have some kids in youth group that I've challenged. They're 8th grade. They're young men. I said, perhaps it's time now for you to be involved in teaching. Perhaps young people where you're at today, perhaps it's time for you to take all the information that you've learned and start applying it and teaching the next generation. Of course, I knew it was going to come out of their mouth. He said, "I don't want to teach kids. I don't like kids." Thank the Lord that someone liked kids because they were able to teach you. I said, well, you know what? Do me a favor. I can't force you to like kids, but do this. For 2 weeks, ask God to open your heart to the possibility of having a ministry with children. So if you'll faithfully do that for 2 weeks, just pray. Ask God, Lord, could you work in my heart and open up that possibility or close it? We'll see what happens in 2 weeks. I got a feeling God's going to do something that they didn't think was possible. The power of the tongue to guide, like a horse. If you've ever ridden a horse, I'm assuming everybody here's ridden a horse? Yeah? Scary, fun. You get on that horse and you say, "Giddy up!" And he just sits there. Or you say, "I'll just squeeze a little bit," and he's like, takes a step. Or you finally give him a big kick in the side and boom, off he goes. And he's running, and you're holding on, and you're going, "Go right." And the horse can look and see her. "Stop, please." And usually someone's yelling, "Pull back on the rein." And as soon as you start pulling back, the horse goes, "Whoa, okay, I got it." That bit inside their mouth causes this massive animal to move to the left, to the right, to go backwards, to go forward. You're the one who's providing the guidance. Or if you're a captain of a ship. We had a little boat as a kid, a little Mercury motor in the back of it. And if you put too much weight on the back of it, the front end would go up, so we'd have to put somebody in the front. But that little rudder in the back would turn us wherever we wanted to go. And a big ships, as you go into the bay, you see these massive, they're not barges, but cargo ships. They've got little rudders. And that rudder moves that ship, regardless of the wind, regardless of the storms. It is still pushing it in that same direction. Guidance. Constructive use. Keep one hand in James and go back to Proverbs. Proverbs 15. The wisest man in the world had much to say about the use of the mouth and the tongue. In Proverbs 15, verse 1, we're talking about using the tongue for constructively. It says, a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Oh, how true that is. If you're driving down the highway and you cut somebody off accidentally, they become very excited. Pull over. And all you have to say, "Sorry." And they don't know how to handle that. Continue moving back. It's chapter 12, verse 22. It says, "Lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but those who deal truthfully are his delight." In chapter 10, verse 19. "In the multitude of words, sin is not lacking, but he who restrains his lips is wise." In all of these, we see a positive and a negative to the whole thing. But the key thing I want to draw out of, look at the positive, look at the constructive power. Go back to James chapter 3. How can such a small thing be used to control such a large and have a large impact? How do we look at just the tongue and say, the tongue has such a huge influence? Who are you influenced by? Does someone speak to you and encourage you to maybe go into ministry? Maybe follow a career path that you're on now? Encourage you to study harder? To reach further than you've reached before? But yet this same small instrument can be used destructively. Follow with me in verse 5 of chapter 3 of James. He says, "Even so, the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. See how great a forest a little fire kindles? And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. The tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body and sets on fire the course of nature. And it is set on fire by hell." The destructive natures of the tongue, it is like a fire. It's like someone throwing a cigarette butt outside the window. I don't notice too many people get excited about that in the city too much. But up in northern parts of California, people get very excited if they see you throw a cigarette out the window because everything is so dry. It is all fuel. And from a little bit of grass on the side of the road, from that small spot there, hundreds, thousands of acres can go up like that from just a spark. You'll have people pulling you over on the side of the road if they see sparks coming off your trailer. From just a spark? Oh, yes. Because as you travel up through the area after a fire, you see everything burnt, and all you see is black throughout the area, and you smell everything that's been burnt. It just fills your nostrils. There's a parallel between a small spark, a small fire, and the tongue. The tongue can be a spark that spreads throughout the entire body. James says it's a world of iniquity. It operates in the realm of the fallen nature. It's like no other part of the body that can cause such destruction and such sin. And it courses through our nature. There is a circular impact that as one spark starts, we don't notice its beginning. We just see the massive effect that it had. The Chicago fire started with a barn, but all we see is an entire city burned up, lives that were ruined, and people who died. We don't think of the small area. The tongue. We don't think of the source of where the problem originated. We just see the devastation as gossip starts or slander, and we see the effects. Trying to track it backwards becomes almost an impossibility. James also mentions that it is set on fire by hell. In James' time period, there was a valley outside of Jerusalem, outside of the walls, called Gehenna, or the Valley of Hinnom. It was there in the days before that human sacrifice was offered. Children were called to pass through the fire of Moloch. By his time period, it became a refuge dump. And they burned trash often. And if the wind was just right, or if you walked through that valley, you could see fire burning, and you could smell rot, and you could smell the ash of burnt flame, or burnt fire. I've walked through that valley. That is a great valley to find archaeological pieces of stuff, because everybody throws out the trash, and now it's history. Back then it's just trash. But it was a constant reminder to the people of Jesus' day. Hell is a horrible place. A reminder through the nostril, through the eyes, that this was something that is destructive. The potential becomes actual when James points out the power of the tongue, our third point. The power of the tongue in verses 7 through 12 is seen in its nature. Did you miss the second one? The second one is the potential. So you've got the first one. What's the first one, everybody? Second one. Third one. Not my muscle, power. Just perhaps the opposite. Look at the nature in verses 7 through 8. For every kind of beast, of birds, of reptiles, and creatures of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by mankind. But no man can tame the tongue. It is unruly, evil, full of deadly poison. It is interesting that throughout the history of man has been able to capture, tame every beast. Do we not have domesticated animals, what we call them? But if you go to the circus, great beasts are in a ring. Elephants, lions are controlled. Well, I mean domesticated. Many superstars may have a lion as a pet, but pretty soon that real nature comes out and they're attacked. We've seen those type of things in the news. But man has control over the creatures. Even fish. I don't mean like flipper and the killer whales that we see in Vallejo. Even the fish, they have used music to call fish to come to them for feeding time. Birds are trained. Many a king or prince will have falcons that they've trained to to catch rabbits and small mammals for them. And yet, the one thing that we seem to have a difficult time of controlling is the tongue. James says the tongue is full of poison. What does he mean by that? Is everything that we come out poisonous? No, but King David said this in Psalm chapter 140, verse 3. They sharpen their tongues like a serpent, and the poison of an asp is under their lips. Oftentimes, what comes out of the mouth is like Roundup. You don't see its immediate effect, but you give it a week, and you see the death that it causes. What forms does this poison come in? Gossip. Gossip is one of the forms that this poison is seen, and we're all familiar with. It's the casual or unconstrained report about another person, often involving details that are not true. And yet throughout the New Testament, it is clearly identified as sin. It's not a prayer request. It's not a highlight reel from the news. It's just called sin. Go to 2 Corinthians. We're going to be hopping right back to James, but go to 2 Corinthians chapter 12. When I point out something that's sin, I want us all to see it for ourselves, especially when we're dealing with this. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 20, Paul says, "For I fear lest when I come to you, I shall not find you such as I wish, and what I shall find by such a you as you do not wish, lest there be contention, jealousy, outbursts of wrath, selfish ambition, backbiting, whispering." Whispering is another word of gossip. Conceits, turmoils. Gossip really fits that idea of whispering because it's typically when you walk into a room and people are gossiping, it's usually psst, and as soon as you come in, if it's about you, it stops. And you feel, oh, this is uncomfortable. We weren't talking about you. And you almost want to say, well, what were you talking about? The other guy. Oh, so you were gossiping. Romans chapter 1, verse 29 says they are gossips in this whole list of fallen man. And yet, Paul and James both talk about gossip as being part of the Christian life. And it not ought be that way. Go back to James. I wish to read to you a poem. It's called, I don't know who wrote it. It's just called Nobody's Friend. My name is Gossip. I have no respect for justice. I maim without killing. I break hearts and ruin lives. I am cunning and malicious and gather strength with age. The more I am quoted, the more I am believed. My victims are helpless. They cannot protect themselves against me because I have no name and no face. To track me down is impossible. The harder you try, the more elusive I become. I am nobody's friend. Once I tarnish their reputation, it is never the same. I topple governments and wreck marriages. I ruin careers and cause sleepless nights, heartaches, and indigestion. I make innocent people cry in their pillows. Even my name hisses. I am called Gossip. I make headlines and headaches. Before you repeat a story, ask yourself, is it true? Is it harmless? Is it necessary? If it isn't, don't repeat it. Another form of poison is slander. It's a statement that may bring harm to a person's reputation. The New Testament calls it an evil report. It is also clearly a sin, stated in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. Peter mentions this in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 1, when he says, put away malice. Put away all slander. How do we avoid something like this? And I'm running out of time. First, let me just say this. Is it kind? Is what someone's saying, is it kind? Let that be your evaluation as someone's coming to you and sharing something about another person. And if it is kind, hear it. If it's not kind, reject it. Do not receive it. Just tell the person that's talking to you, I cannot receive anything unkind about that person that you're talking about. Is it true? It can still be true and yet unkind. Just because it's true does not mean it should be repeated. Is it necessary? Is it important that you share this? Or is it just small talk? Does it lift up? Does it build up? That would make it necessary. If it's building down, it's not necessary. If it's hurtful, it's not necessary. So keep it to yourself. You say, but I'm going to explode if I don't share this with somebody. Good. Share it with God. Tell him. You'll be safe. I don't have time to mess and continue on some of these different forms, but let me just point this. James talks about it being practical. Is it practical in our life? He says we are to bless. Out of the same mouth we are to bless one another. With it we bless our God and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the image of God. Out of the same mouth proceeds blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things not ought to be so. For out of a drinking fountain, you don't expect to taste fresh water, and at the next time you go to take a drink, salt water. Our mouths should be proclaiming blessings upon one another, not cursing one another. Let that not be a part of us. Let that be the end. Let me conclude with something that perhaps you can relate to this. I lost a very little word the other day. It was a very naughty word. I had not meant to say. But then, it was not really lost when from my lips it flew. My little brother picked it up. And now he says it too. The terrible tongue that each of us carry has the power, has the potential, and has a priority in our lives. Make sure we follow what James is talking about and use it as a way of constructing, building one another up. And when it comes to the other, let us move far away. For in truth, everyone here has been involved in gossip at one time or another. We're all guilty of that. But let it not be characterize our lives that we live right now. Let blessings flow from our lips as we follow the Lord. Will you join me as we pray? Lord, there seems like there is so much that we could possibly say in regards to controlling our mouths. We know that each one of us will be tested moments after we leave this building. As we get in cars driving home, go out to eat, throughout the week, we will be challenged with what comes off our lips. May we be mindful, and may your Holy Spirit convict us and prompt us from what we've been studying this morning. In Jesus' name, amen.